think I will get started and I will keep an eye on our participants as they're joining. Welcome, everybody. I'm really glad that you can join us here tonight. My name is Yael Wand. I'm the Executive Director of Salt Spring Arts. And just so everybody is aware, we are recording this session. So if it is an issue for you, you are welcome to turn off your video. We do ask that everyone stays muted during the session. There's going to be a lot of us. I'm here today at Mann Hall in our wonderful heritage building, and of course in Ganges Village, also known as Xiaut. And that is a similar pronunciation I just learned today, both in the Sanchosin and the Halkominam language. And we're very privileged to be here on the traditional territories of the Halkominam and Sanchosin speaking peoples. I also would like to thank our funders and collaborators on this project. Art Spring, the Capital Regional District, the Salt Spring Foundation, as well as Graffiti Theater have all been instrumental in making this project and initiative happen. And I very much want to thank you for being here tonight, for taking time to join us. I think we're also going to have, I'm hoping we're going to have Director Holman join us in a little bit. I'm not sure if Gary's already here and I'm not seeing him, but hopefully he'll be joining us in a moment. We started this initiative last spring, early last spring. We were hearing a lot for many months and a long time. We've been hearing about the challenges for space and venues on island. And when the Sims building, when we learned the Sims building was going to be available to community use, I heard that conversation get really excited and people's imaginations took hold. So we knew it was time to dive into the conversation about arts and culture facilities on island. We recognized it as an opportunity to really have a bigger conversation about the arts and about how facilities play into our local culture. So we reached out to Patricia Huntsman, and we're so grateful that Patricia has been leading us through this process. Patricia is a two-time nationally award-winning cultural strategist. She's worked across Canada and internationally in senior roles in the creative industry for over 25 years. Her British Columbia-based team practice is centered around systems change and offers a full roster of arts management, cultural policy writing and planning, and communication services tailored to building communities through culture. In 2016, Patricia completed a two-part residency program, New Fundamentals, Leadership in the Cultural and Creative Industries at the Banff Center. She holds a diploma in French studies. That's for those of you who are French studies buffs, that's 18th to 20th century French literature and art history. I don't think it'll come up tonight, but you never know. And that's from the Sorbonne University in Paris. And she has an MBA from North America's oldest public university, the University of New Brunswick. In addition to all that, Patricia is an avid supporter of performing and visual arts. She has served as a director on notable boards across Canada and maintains an active membership in professional associations, including the Canadian Museums Association, the Creative City Network of Canada, and the Americans for the Arts. So I'm going to pass it over to Patricia.
Thank you, Yael. And thank you to the community members who are joining us here this evening. It's been great to see some repeating faces that we've had from our community workshops that we did in the summer. So thank you for joining us tonight. The presentation tonight is a walkthrough of the Arts and Culture Facilities Framework. So I'll be taking about 25 minutes to go through the framework with you and share some of our findings and some of the key recommendations to move forward on how to use your assets that you have in the short term as well as in the longer term. And following that, we'll be having a Q&A to answer any questions, receive any comments that you might have following our walkthrough of the plan. And you're welcome to use the chat for that, the chat function for that. And Regan, who I'll introduce right now, will be monitoring the chat and helping to moderate our session this evening. And for those who do not know Regan. Regan Shrum is a curator, artist, and arts administrator based in the traditional and unceded lands of the Lekwungen-speaking people, currently known as Victoria. And you may remember, some of you, they were the Salt Spring Artists in Residence with the Salt Spring Arts Council back in 2017. So Regan's very familiar with the community and has enjoyed their time there. So thank you, Regan, and I will pass it over to you.
Yeah, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Ariel, if you want to move to the next slide if possible, thank you. So there's a couple, I know most of us are used to Zoom, but there's just a couple tech tips that we have. So we ask you throughout this time that you please mute yourself, and if you are unable to, we will be muting you. If you have any questions, you can use the chat function. I'll even put something in the chat right now. You could also use the chat to have any tech issues. You can direct message me itself, and I will be checking throughout. If you're unfamiliar, the chat is on the very bottom of your Zoom screen with a little comment box as shown on this. We ask you, if you are having internet troubles, please turn off your video and just using audio. We will be taking questions at the end through the chat and first focusing through the chat on those questions. If we have more time, we will then use the raise hand function, and then we'll take some of your questions if we have time via you speaking. In addition, while the presentation is happening, we ask, probably the best way of viewing is to go up to the right-hand corner, upper right-hand corner with the view screen, and you can select side-by-side speaker, which will allow whoever is speaking at the moment, which will mostly be Patricia during the presentation, to focus on that person and get to see the slide in a better view. If you want to go to the next slide. Thank you. And these are just a couple agreements that we have to make sure that we are all creating a good space for each other. So we like to create as comfortable as possible. There we go. And sometimes that means we can feel maybe uncomfortable or feel curious in tension, but we'd like to keep it as safe as possible. So that includes using gender neutral language, so avoiding terms such as guys or ladies and gentlemen, using things like people or folks, speaking from your own language, using I statements as part of that, making sure that if you have spoken up or written in the chat, that you're making sure that you give space for other people who may not have had the time yet to write or speak, making sure that we make space for everyone. We want to keep this very confidential, so making sure that you share the lessons and not necessarily specific names if you are sharing database stories. We ask you to actively participate and also listen at the same time, and assume everyone here is here with the best and positive intentions. And please bring that positive intention yourself. And together, as we all do this, that's how we create safer spaces. So please, again, if you have any comments or anything, any tech issues, I will be checking the chat, but I'll give it back to Patricia.
Thank you, Regan. And Yael, if you want to just bring up the PDF there again, and I just have a couple of pages to run through. Thank you. If you want to go to the next. So tonight we'll go into the plan, and I'll be walking you through that. And then, as we said, have a Q&A session, and then just a little wrap up at the end. And Yael, if you want to go forward. Thank you. And next. There we go. And just if you want to skip ahead to the next one. One thing going into the plan that I really want to, some of you might remember this from our community workshops that we did in the summer, but it's really important when we're thinking of facilities planning to anticipate what's ahead and not simply what's happening right now. And how we're using our facilities right now. So thinking of what are the larger context changes in arts and culture that are going to affect our usage going forward. And a few of these are shared here on the screen, and I think it's very important that we just take a moment to consider these. We know that there's major intergenerational shifts happening. We have a lot of data behind how people like to participate in the arts, and we know that the #1 form of participation that Canadians prefer is through experiences, through festivals and events and participatory experiences. So we've gone through a major shift in our sector over the last 10 to 15 years of how people from an audience perspective are participating in the arts. And then we've had also major shifts in terms of administration, in terms of funding models, in terms of operating models. And these are all pieces that we need to consider in our facilities plan and have been kept and are integrated into the facilities framework that we're sharing tonight. The other important thing is to understand the life cycle of arts organizations. And in British Columbia, in terms of our colonial organizations, they're actually kind of a little bit further behind in terms of professionalization of the arts than we see in other parts of Canada. So with that, we have a lot of arts organizations that sort of stuck in growth mode, and they're not sort of moving on to more established sort of programming and administration. And this causes some problems sometimes in communities in terms of having that capacity building that is needed in order to manage a space, coordinate space, and we tend to lean on our larger organizations in our communities when this is the case. So that's something to consider in our situation. The other piece is the changing art forms and sort of the growth of some art forms, including accessibility arts and family arts. One thing out of the UK is the Family Arts Campaign to see if your facility and your venue is family arts friendly. So there's a good checklist there to consider your space, and are you being welcoming to families. And we see part of the work I've done in other cities is looking at how spaces can be intergenerational, and so that we can have these uses of our spaces and that allow for everybody to be coming in, and there isn't this splintered off programming of seniors programming, children's programming, etc. So we want to see more intergenerational learning. So I spend a lot of time on this. Sometimes I just do a workshop just on this, but I just wanted to kind of keep this in mind. The other piece is here we have, of course, digital strategies and a lot of new forms of media arts that should also be considered in our mix, and what their needs are from a facilities perspective, as well as interpretive assistance. And of course, we're called upon in terms of our actions in truth and reconciliation, and our need to diversify in terms of our audiences and our organizations ourselves. So I just wanted to highlight a few of those things to consider, that, you know, we are a big changing sector. We're a major sector in British Columbia in terms of our output and the amount of people who work in our sector, and there's lots of really good helpful data that has gone into this plan in terms of more of a sector-wide knowledge base. And Yael, if you just want to, the project purpose, and I'm happy, I think I saw Dan Ovington's here from CRD, so thank you, Dan, for joining us. As Yael mentioned, the sort of catalyst to getting this going was the opportunity of the Sims building, and the potential uses for that in terms of community use. And that did help to kind of get the project started. But what is realized is that there needed to be a more active and broader based community consultation process to determine our current versus potential arts and cultural space based on a needs assessment component and then broader engagement. So we did a facilities matrix and gathered good data that way, which was very helpful. We had lots of good responses there. And then we did a really co-created community engagement, which I was very pleased with, and I'll go into a few details shortly with that. So what we've done is we produced our arts and culture facilities framework, and it outlines potential investment and strategic directions for arts and cultural assets on the island. And this will help ideally inform some of the potential use of SIMS, and then just also consider our existing spaces. But one of the most important things about this project, having heard and having read and seen previous processes on the island not necessarily go well, or there's been a lot of splintering or divisiveness in the community and some very unhelpful communication styles, we wanted to use this opportunity to really to foster cultural leadership by convening and collaborating with many different organizations and individuals to really help advance cultural development on the island. Because if you want to receive any funding whatsoever from government, you have to see collaboration and partnership. There needs to be, at any level of government, they want to see how many organizations can best work together to help make facilities and spaces work. So this is something that we really need to nurture in the community, and I was really glad we've had some success with this process through that. So yeah, if you just want to end that, and I'll just skip over to, you can just close that, thank you. And I will, one second, just closing that. And I will skip into the framework. For those of you who haven't had a chance yet, just one second, I'll just get my screen organized here. There we go. For those of you who haven't had a chance yet, Yael, can you just let me know that the screen share is it's good? Okay, perfect. Just double checking. Multiple things open here on my desktop. For those of you who haven't seen it, there is an updated draft of the facilities framework on the project site at Salt Spring Arts, which you're welcome to check out. And so I invite you to do that if you haven't already looked at it. I share Yael's thanks in our project supporters who made this happen, and I really appreciated that we were able to work with a variety of organizations on this project to not only fund it, but to really listen to a variety of voices from a variety of different art forms. Also very grateful to our local Sequantan speaking peoples and the Hokwaniam speaking peoples who we hope to do further engagement with and recognize that we are on their land, and hope to hear more. We did have some participation through the task group, but look forward to more relationship building going forward. We've divided the plan as such. As you see, there's a bit of a report out on how we went about our process, the engagement summary, who we engaged with, what our main findings were, and then we go into our strategic priorities. These are more longer term pieces that I think the community can work together, and I have ways that you can do this going forward to address your space needs. And then when our moving forward section looks at some of the key recommendations, the sort of key stumbling blocks that you really need to work through in order to make better use of your arts and culture facilities, both existing for the shorter term and near term, as well as longer term. So we start off with our key takeaways here, and looking at that, it essentially functions as an executive summary. But to point out that the arts and culture framework that you're seeing tonight outlines our strategic priorities, and each is supported with our supporting actions. So it isn't just simply big lofty goals and big ideas. Each has actions that will have an identified timeline that as a community you work on addressing. So it is suggesting investment for current assets as well as SIMS. But I'd also like to point out that the purpose of this process was not to do a business plan for Sims. That is something that can come later, and that can come through organizations working together. So I'll speak more on that. And it does weave in previous studies and data collection efforts that have been done. And we know that Graffiti Theater had a report done, and other lots of data actually going back for quite a few years. So we were able to access that and bring that into our process, which was great. And also really work with a task group, a community task group, which I'll speak to, who helped kind of co-design how we should do engagement on Salt Spring, really pointing out what's worked in the past and what hasn't worked. And so we used that guidance, which did help us. One of the important pieces that I'd like you to all really give an important thought to is that Salt Spring identity, it's historically been closely tied to arts and culture. But now we see that due to a lack of housing affordability and a changing sense of place, it really is at risk of no longer being the arts-friendly community it was. And this was a sentiment that was expressed in community engagement. And I think it's important to look in the cultural development section of the framework to read more on that, because it is something that is very, very much under threat. And of course, our facilities play into that as well. We're happy that we had a reach of 300 residents who worked collaboratively, and we were actually happy to really overcome some of the community divisiveness that we've seen in the past, and some of which was intergenerational, and that helped shape the plan. So we're pleased to see that. And some of the workshops were actually quite fun, and there was some good sort of laughing about your, like, not me, but community members sort of laughing at themselves about what, Salt Springers sort of find. And so it was great to see, and appreciated a lot of the sharing of previous efforts that a lot of community members have done in terms of advancing arts and cultures there, which is great to see. There are a number of notable issues and challenges which I'll share with you. We've outlined some values and drivers that going forward, as you work on this, you should keep in mind. And as I mentioned, we have some specific recommendations going forward. And I'd like to thank everybody who contributed images to the framework, who really helped animate it. So thank you. So we have our introduction section, the project overview, which I've just spoken to. Again, the reader, important to understand that it's beyond the scope of the framework to present a business plan for the community use of Sims. That is a separate process that would be led through the CRD. However, we do make recommendations about potential uses for Sims from an arts and culture lens. The other piece that is important to point out is Salt Spring has not benefited from having a cultural plan or an art strategy that is island-wide, and as such, that's when we would probably see a number of cultural development strategies and needs being planned out over the long term. So as part of this process, we did pick up a lot of cultural development needs that can be addressed going forward, and we've woven them into this plan. So there is a big need in terms of community collaboration and sort of convening the different arts and cultural groups in the community, and as well as enthusiasts and hobbyists as well. So that will be an important piece going forward. But one of the big things that did stick out, as we mentioned, is this concern that's very present about Salt Spring no longer being arts friendly, and a lot of spaces, art galleries, theater studios, and other types of cultural assets are being directly impacted in their ability to carry out their functions and deliver the arts and culture services. And a lot of this is because of deferred maintenance on your arts and culture facilities, and really lack of asset management at a local level. And we know there's a lot of challenges around intergovernmental layers in Salt Spring and multi-jurisdictions. So I appreciate that. But at the same time, we see that other areas of the island in terms of sports and recreation have been better managed historically, and space allocated historically to sports and recreation. So we need to see a change here, and we've outlined ways to do this. But right now we are seeing a threat of demand exceeding the ability to deliver, and that this is a threat to, I think, that identity of Salt Spring being this very arts-friendly place. And I invite you to learn more about how arts and culture facilities fits into cultural development, and that's shared here. Some of the community context pieces that were identified were, again, this trickiness around previous planning processes where there was very historical dysfunction amongst community members in trying to do consultation, and the graffiti theater report was one of the most critical reviews of a community that I've ever read. But it was good that we had that report, because then we said, okay, well, how can we go and change this for this process and hear from more voices and try to build that cohesion and collaboration, which was helpful, and I'm glad we were able to do that. Planning for arts and culture facilities on the island is significantly lacking. There is a massive deferred maintenance issue that I just noted. There isn't a facilities master plan for managing assets on the island. And there's a lot of local challenges on land constraints, zoning and water restrictions as well. So it's this sort of lack of coordinated approach, which is a concern. And I know you all know what these issues are, the intergovernmental relations. One of the things that we see in arts and culture, particularly in British Columbia, that is a barrier to change, which has been validated by Vancouver Foundation and the BC Arts Council, is that there's a lack of local, there's a lack of cultural literacy at local levels. And we see this particularly in various levels of government, at local and regional levels in particular, that there just isn't an understanding of, that arts and culture isn't just simply a frill or a nice to have, but it's actually plays a much more strategic role in our community planning, and especially for both community, social and wellness, as well as economic development and tourism. And this was really apparent on Salt Spring, is this a really low level of cultural development literacy at the various levels of government. And so that it's going to be an important piece for organizations like Salt Spring Arts to try and address that going forward. We also saw a need for better diversity and inclusion in processes, in community engagement processes, and creative safer spaces amongst arts and cultural organizations. This was quite lacking, and a lot of that going back to the affordability crisis that you're having there. There was also a lot of local resistance to the idea in the graffiti theater report to a multi-use facility. However, we didn't find that so much in our process, that there ideally could work towards a multi-use facility in the community. I shared that there has been a lot of issues around communication in the community, people splintering off with information, or often having not a significant lack, there's often not having a full comprehension of arts and culture development, and those larger kind of context pieces. So that was a tricky one to manage, but I'm glad we did so in this process. In terms of our engagement summary, we had a variety of engagement nodes. We had our needs assessment, which was an inventory of our existing spaces, how they're being used, what the needs are, what the pain points are with the spaces. And I appreciate there was Derek had shared a lot from the Community Performing Arts Society. We got really good detail there as well, and other people gave previous reports and studies and findings that had been done. So that all really helped towards the framework. We also placed sounding boards all around the community, which was an easy passive way to get engagement. And we had 172 responses through our sounding boards at various locations. So they were at Fernwood Cafe, the Laundromat, Earth Candy on the north end as well. Oh yeah, at Fernwood. And then Man Hall and Rock Salt and Barb's Buns and a Switchboard Cafe. So that was really helpful. We did a pop-up at the market and gathered 30 responses there. And our community workshops we had 2, and they had 45 participants. So I was really pleased with that. And we had 84 responses directly through the intake, which was great. And a variety of mixes there, both individuals as well as arts and culture groups, which was helpful. And then total responses 300, which was very useful for informing the plan development here. Those are just more details about those engagement nodes that we carried out. And the big piece in terms of our needs assessments, affordability was the biggest challenge. And there's a few things here. One of the things that actually the task group and a few community members said, we should organize the plan by having a myth-busting section. And there's quite a few kind of myths or things that this, again, a lack of sort of comprehension, which has stemmed from, I think, a lack of communication and information sharing amongst community members, amongst the arts and culture community. But there's this perceived idea that ArtSpring, for instance, is, is pricing out local community, when we actually know that 75% of its use is for local community groups, and that it has the most discounted rate amongst any of our regional theaters for community use. So it has a deeply discounted rate. So I think that's a piece that we really need to kind of better understand. That said, some people do find the affordability, that affordability issue is still there for them. So there is a need for certainly more affordable space, a lot of it certainly around rehearsal space and storage space, and to gather and meet and organize events. And I would encourage, for those who want to kind of dig deeper, Space for Community is a really good organization that has been gathering a lot of statistics about how community use is getting priced out of markets in British Columbia. And this is Salt Spring isn't immune to this as well. And if you check out Space for Community, they have a really good report on this, and how we see arts and culture is basically getting displaced out of towns, cities, and and metro cities, as areas such as Vancouver. Competition and lack of collaboration. There is a real divisiveness in terms of not coming together to try and better coordinate and use spaces. The research showed a lack of appropriate spaces and facilities in terms of layout and accessibility, and really directly linked to the ability of many organizations to not be able to expand or evolve their programming. Accessibility was a big concern as well. A lot of overlap, and again, sort of kind of this lack of management issue. The condition of most spaces, it was sort of noted as satisfactory, but it's a sort of a reluctant satisfactory. It's sort of like, well, we have it, so we're going to use it. But when we think of how these assets are being managed, like even talking with Yael and Man Hall, like it shouldn't be like this. You should be asking for more and expecting more in terms of your community spaces, and their condition, because their condition in many cases is not adequate for its use, and in some cases questionable in terms of safety. So, and there is a lack of, there was definitely a lack of awareness of, where to go to for what, and in terms of renting spaces, who to contact, etc. So our strategic priorities, and these were validated by the community in September, we identified a number of values and drivers that you can need to consider going forward as you implement this framework. And so we have affordability, being an arts-friendly island, so making sure you're addressing pieces in the community and things that come up so you can maintain this idea of being an arts-friendly community, because it really is linked to your cultural identity on the island. Being supportive and collaborative in your work going forward, and making better efforts to work intergenerationally as well. And building more inclusiveness and awareness, as well as accessibility, and addressing your housing issue, because we know that if you don't have this housing problem being worked on, you're not going to be able to have the people to work in these organizations, or, and more importantly, out in your community more generally. But we know that it is an issue for the arts organizations on the island to be able to find people to come and work because of your housing crisis, and that will only get worse if it's not addressed in here. So if you had a future use, a future building, you would want to include perhaps like accommodations for arts workers, for instance, would be an important piece there. There's also a strong desire to see mentorship happen amongst generations, which is good to see, as well as looking from a sustainability lens, because right now, from a variety of angles, your facilities management does not look sustainable. And really to understand that community leadership, people would talk about community leaders often in this process, and it's kind of a funny word, because sometimes some of that leadership really lent itself to privilege and sort of professional roles that people have had in the community, when really leadership today is more so about convening and bringing people together in a collaborative way. So we really need to consider that going forward, in terms of bringing people together in the same room to address the implementation items here, as well as your broader community needs. The strategic priority one that was validated by the community was the big need for programming space. And we did identify in SIMS the potential for space for programming. And here you see a number of supporting actions. I'm not going to go through each of them, that the community, as well as, through when we look at arts and culture facilities programming and how it's used, that these are some of the sort of longer term actions that you can take to address your programming space issues. The second strategic priority to work on going forward was the need around outdoor arts, creative placemaking, and public art. And there was a sense in the community that this really lent itself to Salt Spring, and that arts and cultural participation isn't simply about going into facilities and spaces and venues, but that we can have an animated public realm that allows for arts and culture presentation and participation going forward. So a number of supporting actions identified there. The third priority was working towards a creative hub, a space for studios, maker spaces, and co-working spaces going forward. And this really speaks to, there's a lot of, certainly there's the potters and the weavers and spinners and printmakers and a number of organizations that do need the studio space, but also new forms of art making, and particularly in terms of digital arts as well. So, and what their equipment needs are outlined in here as well. And we look at the need for really collaborative use at SIMS in this section. And the strategic priority 4 surrounds, this is a big one. They're all equally important, but this is a really significant pain point for affordable and accessible rental, rehearsal, and storage space. And we see in here also prioritizing space at Sims. The existing music spaces in the South Block would be ideal for this. And while the school district may be using them and may intend to use those spaces going forward, this would be the preference for arts and cultural organizations to, especially community performing arts organizations, to be able to use those spaces. But really to look at the South Block as a potential space for rehearsal space and some storage, and it would really help to address the fact that this was a good quote that I received from Derek, but just that there's basically people storing things in barns and just literally like all over the island and in all sorts of like little nooks and crannies, and how things can better be managed. But more importantly, I think for our community performing arts organizations, that they have the opportunity to rehearse in one space and have that consistency, have their materials in one place, all their equipment, etc., would really help. And some not being able to access Art Springs, so this would be a good use going forward of the Sims property. So I think it's really important as we going into some of our key recommendations here, and I'll follow up. I'll allow 20 minutes here for questions. It's really important you can't just be considering one facility on its own. You have to think of it as a bit of an ecosystem, and there needs to be a better balance of use, coordination, and maintenance, and that there's an interplay between all of these spaces and facilities, which really needs to be better optimized. And the framework going forward, if you read it, can work towards that. The other piece that's important is to sort of step back and think of the Ganges Village in particular as a arts and cultural district. And you have Mann Hall at the end, potential use of the land next to the pool. You have the Salt Spring Island Middle School sort of at the northern part of Ganges. And then, you have your cafes and different restaurants that can be arts friendly for presentation of arts and culture. You have a Centennial Park, and then Art Spring down in the lower corner. So how can these be better connected through wayfinding and through animating Ganges Village through sort of an arts and culture district, and better flow between these facilities to make it seem more cohesive, which be an important piece to consider. So if we look at that, sort of, and especially through arts branded wayfinding for Arts Salt Spring, or however you wanted to do this, that there's an opportunity here, so that certainly for visitors, it would just create this better sense of identity of being an arts friendly island and community that you sort of were known for. Dedicating a portion of Sims to community arts use is a key recommendation. Again, we're looking at those South Block classrooms would be ideal, and though they're currently intended for the school district, they can serve and be shared amongst the printmakers, really all for community arts. I think community arts really needs a home right now. It can't find a home in other facilities and spaces, and I think grouping these community arts organizations together at Sims would be the best use of that space. So this would include our printmakers and painters, weavers and spinners, and potters, and giving them affordable rented studio storage and programming space. And the Salt Spring community performing arts groups, that's about 18 local groups for music, theater, dance, and affordable rental, rehearsal, and storage space. So how this would help is through the coordination. It does need to have some coordinating body, and Salt Spring Arts would probably be the most logical organization or best suited organization to be managing that function with the above identified subtenants. Community arts is a critical part of being a arts council who are funded to do arts-based community development. So this would help through having a coordinated role at SIMS to better serve the community and foster that collaboration going forward, which has been a really key barrier to advancing arts and culture on the island. So with that, we would need an operational agreement between the CRD and Salt Spring Arts to take Salt Spring Arts and task Salt Spring Arts to manage and operate a dedicated arts use area on SIMS, to work in collaboration with other community uses at the facility, such as maybe Transition Salt Spring or other community groups. And how this would help is most organizations, it was very apparent most organizations just don't have the capacity to manage an arts facility for various uses. However, Salt Spring Arts or Art Springs could do so through a third-party agreement. And coordination was cited as an overall barrier to effectively managing existing spaces, with many groups competing and not collaborating around space. Expanding and better connecting Art Spring to the Arts Village is an important piece as well. We know that it is at capacity, 75% of its use being for the local community, but it does have a number of functional limitations, much of which was the result of a process that lacked theater design and architecture expertise and the right kind of funding. So there is a heavily subsidized rate for local groups, but if we saw some of the community arts organizations put to SIMS, then we could better optimize Art Spring for its uses, and it could offer more flexible use to other arts presenters, locals, and more effectively achieve its mandate, which it's already doing, but it's at capacity and it's really sort of pushed on the brink right now. So it would be great to, have it better functional so that it doesn't have this competing pressure on it all the time. And addressing deferred maintenance of Mann Hall is a critical need. And right now, Salt Spring Arts is allocated funding for programming delivery to the community by CRD. But however, due to the deferred maintenance of this asset from the school district, a portion of that programming funding from the CRD actually gets allocated to kind of doing band-aid jobs every year to the hall, and this is a 117-year-old facility. So when I've done work in other communities that have kind of that same age of building, typically what would be done is there is a maintenance plan and funding from various levels of government to do the deferred maintenance, but that doesn't fall into part of the operating agreement. Or if it does fall into part of the operating agreement, the deferred maintenance pieces have been addressed through a separate funding. So this is a piece that needs to really be worked on and really coordinated through our various levels of government going forward. And because this sort of annual band-aiding approach of taking programming money to try and maintain the facility is not sustainable, and quite clearly it's not working despite best efforts. So convening an ongoing cultural roundtable is an important piece in terms of implementing the framework going forward. And cultural roundtables are a more inclusive approach to advancing cultural development rather than these, more traditional hierarchical sort of invitation-only committees that are more restrictive and tend to privilege certain arts organizations. So this would be a better way. You would also want to foster an ecosystem approach by bringing peer sectors such as sustainability and wellness and tourism and economic development, etc., as part of that cultural roundtable. And when this does happen, and usually it would be an arts council that leads or that convenes this, at least to start, you see a lot of traction in your cultural development and things getting done, which would be great to see. Also important to recognize that while there's guilds and there's organizations that have been established and they work together and they kind of have a certain amount of lobbying power, there is also a lot of growing art forms and individual artists who may not be able to coordinate and perhaps put in a pitch to the CRD for space. So we don't want to leave those people out. And in particular, we're thinking of creative entrepreneurs here who can actually help achieve a balance in housing affordability value sustainability and I mean, this is future audiences and future residents who can move to Salt Spring. So having sort of potential space maybe in the future, but if there can be some auxiliary space at Sims for their use would be really helpful. But we do see a need for some type of co-working space, co-studio space for these organizations. And we do see an increasing number of artists and creative entrepreneurs being interested in this area of the island, of Southern Gulf Islands, as well as the main island. So definitely an opportunity for attraction there. And then we wanted to make sure that we're fostering our arts-friendly auxiliary spaces. So making sure that we're working with local businesses and restaurants and cafes to maintain that arts-friendly that arts friendliness going forward, so that we can have presentation and participation in the arts. So I'd like to also just take a moment to thank everybody who did attend the community workshops, and we also had our task group who helped guide the process as well and shared, our community context pieces, which was great. I'd also like to thank Derek Milton and Rebecca Nygaard and Cicela at ArtSpring, who really helped to provide a deeper information and sharing of previous data and collection efforts that have happened. So, and of course, I'd like to thank Yael and the staff at Salt Spring Arts and my colleague Karen Mula, who helped create the plan. So I realize we are well beyond our sort of half hour in presenting it, but I just wanted to give you a walkthrough of what each section of the plan looks like, and I'd be happy to answer questions going forward.
Do you still want, Patricia, about 20 minutes for questions, or?
Let's see what we can get through with the next sort of 10 to 15.
Great.
Yeah.
So if you'd like to add your questions to the chat. So far we've just had Brian Young said that he loved the quote from Derek. Exactly right. Thank you for voicing this.
And let me just bring up the thing. There we go. So I'm sure that.
Okay. So we have a question from Deborah. This was a fabulous presentation. What are the next steps?
Yeah, critical on this, Deborah, will be convening a cultural roundtable. Certainly a lot of different organizations and individuals helped create this plan. So gathering those people together, and what I've shared right here, let me just fast forward here for you, is basically taking all of the strategic priorities and all of the supporting actions, and then collectively sort of timelining and addressing the resources required to initiate. So in some cases, there's some of those supporting actions where I know there would be specific arts and cultural groups or individuals who would probably want to take on that supporting action. So it's going to be really important to kind of get you all in a room and then work on the implementation together, because I can already see that there's different people who'd be able to kind of, get that piece done in terms of implementation. Okay.
Another question we have is about Salt Spring Arts Council and many references referring to that organization managing the Sims. The question is, has the board actually agreed to this?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jim. Thanks for that. That's a discussion that the organization's having at this time, and I'd invite Yael or Kathy to speak to that.
Thanks, Jim, for that question. I think it's a discussion absolutely that we have been mulling over for the past few months. At this point, with the CRD in process, so we don't know what will happen at Sims. So we're open to that conversation if it becomes a real need, that there needs to be an arts organization managing a section of it. So I think because it's still early in the process of how much space will be used at Sim, what groups will be there, we can't quite answer that question yet. I think we'll respond as the need arises.
But definitely, in order for an art section at Sims to work, it's going to need a coordinator. And the two sort of organizations that sort of have the best capacity for that would be and have professional arts administrators would be either Salt Spring Arts or Art Spring. And I think it's important to know that Arts Council, yes, historically had a very visual and applied arts focus, but that has changed, and it's very critical for the organization going forward to represent all our art forms. Any other questions?
Yeah, we just have another. Well, first, I just want to acknowledge Kathy said in the chat, thank you so much for this. It really mirrors the engagement we've been hearing over the past months. From Brian, will SSA be considered approaching CRD and Director Hoffman to develop a contributory service agreement to providing ongoing sustainable funding from the tax base to promote the arts and culture on Vancouver Island?
Yeah, that was Brian. Hi, Brian. Where's Brian? Somewhere in there. There we go. Hi. Yeah, I think this is that's a important one to go back. There already is an operating agreement between the CRD and Salt Spring Arts, so that's a conversation that those two organizations really need to have going forward. But really important that that cultural development piece really be continued on. Salt Spring Arts receives its funding from BC Arts Council, the bulk of its funding through BC Arts Council, and critical to that is doing arts-based community development. That's why they receive their operating funding from the government. So this completely aligns with that. So that's an important piece going forward for sure.
Yeah. Another comment that we have from Howard, it seems like there is opportunity for Art Spring to leverage their infrastructure to meet more of the demand. I'm also noticing we have a hand up in the chat. So
yeah,
what?
Hi, Henry. Yeah, I'll speak to Howard's. Yeah, in the framework, which I invite you to read in more detail, we do outline how Art Spring could better meet the demands and leverage their infrastructure. And one of the pieces is there is the site behind Art Spring that is part of their land that could be developed, I think, to really help serve the community going forward. So that's a potential there that's included in the framework as well. But I think taking some of those community groups and having them spaced at Sims would really help Art Spring, to your point, leverage their infrastructure for sure. Let's go to Harry, and then we'll go back to the chat. Hi, Harry.
Yeah, hi. Hi there. Well, thanks for the presentation. And I want to follow up on Jim's question, and this would be addressed to Yael. And if the Arts Council agreed to be part of the management, would that lead to the development of the business plan for an arts and cultural center? And if not, how would the community go about developing the plan for such a center?
I think at this point in the process, the CRD is looking at requests from the community to see what the needs are. And I know there is a lot of conversation happening at various arts and culture groups about how they can collaborate. Actually, it's really heartening to see how much collaboration there is and people preparing to put in expressions of interest together. So in terms of future developments of a business plan, I think it's a little early to speak to that, but it is something that we would be happy to step into should that be, where the community is wanting to take Sims to. And I think the CRD has to be a big part of that conversation, obviously, and the various arts groups that both have space and that maybe cannot get into Sims. At that point, I think we can see what we can do as a community to build a business plan.
Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, thanks so much for that.
Thanks. I'll just go back to the chat there, Regan. I'm just following along, and yeah, thank you for that, Brian. Yeah, what I think is important for everyone to understand is basically you do have a way forward in your existing, the facilities that are outlined here, and taking those steps is certainly going to help But the piece is to follow the CRD's process. This aligns very nicely because we see those organizations identified that could be best suited for SIMS. So those organizations coming together to then work with the CRD would be critical. I'll speak to Howard's point. There was a historical reluctance for a multi-use facility, but what we found in our present work is that there actually is a demand for a multi-use kind of cultural hub going forward for various space uses, including studio space. So just to clarify that point so that people aren't confused. Howard, did you want to speak to that or have a follow-up question on that? I think you're there somewhere.
No, I am here. No, what I read in what I was trying to read was there seemed to be this reluctance to kind of develop some spaces, yet the demand was seemed to be quite high. So I just didn't see where you were making that connection.
Yeah, and that was in that was in the graffiti theater report, but we didn't find that because there is so all things being equal, say we could do everything in this plan and magic pots of money happen all at once. If we had our community arts organizations performing and visual and applied arts going to SIMS, that's managed by some coordinator role, either somebody at Salt Spring Arts or ArtSpring, then yes, we'd have the potential to make our best use of ArtSpring. That's definitely true. We still have this massive deferred maintenance issue, though, for Mann Hall that would have to be addressed as well. And then but then even if we did all those things, we still have a gap. And we do need to work towards having some kind of multi-use facility going forward. But what I'm concerned about is with those needs and issues and challenges that were identified in the needs assessment, I'm worried that you're going to you're approaching this tipping point, if you're not already there, due to your housing affordability and some of those other issues that are mentioned, that that you're going to that you're going to have this all of a sudden a collapsing arts and cultural sector on Salt Spring. So it is a concern.
And the housing affordability is obviously the largest issue. What you haven't talked to is the whole island is dealing with this, and it's not just our sector. And so the question then becomes who are we partnering with, and who we should be collaborating with. There's no mention of working with other sectors, other areas.
Yeah, there actually is in there. It's in the issues and challenges earlier, and definitely that has a multi-jurisdictional component to it. But more importantly, one of the key recommendations in here with the cultural roundtable is that you do have your various levels of government at your cultural roundtable. You do have your other sectors present at the cultural roundtable to move forward. So yes, that is identified there. And one thing that's been good with this is we've had the peer sectors participating in this. So I am pleased with that.
Thank you.
We have two questions in the chat. The first one's concerning about more music venues and how to facilitate more music venues.
Yeah, so that did come up. This is good. This Yvonne, thank you for that. Yeah, it came up quite frequently in our consultations, in our community engagement, and we did identify, you'll see in the supporting actions, making sort of better use of outdoor venues in particular, the gazebo at the park and Centennial Park, and how that could be better modified. So I think that's in strategic priority 2. You can look at that, and there's a number of pieces that have been identified for that, and definitely having some sim space for community performing arts for music is critical. And then also making sure that, you know, people setting up businesses or transferring their businesses in the Ganges area, that they maintain that arts friendliness to, you know, welcome musicians to perform and have potential setups that work for musicians.
The other question we have is about Deborah was the director of Chamber of Commerce, and a surprising number of people at town halls didn't want more people coming to the island. Did this come up in your study? And if so, how do you best address this?
The arts will solve all. No, Deborah, yeah, I think there's there are various salt springs within Salt Spring, and I think this is a piece. There was definitely some generational splits that we saw in the community, and definitely we see an increase on secondhand ownership in the island versus more permanent residents. So these are things that did come up certainly in our findings. But I think what's recognized, at least amongst the arts and culture groups, the tourism groups that participate, tourism group that participated, and some of our other sectors, is that there is a desire to see more people move here. There's certainly a desire to see creative entrepreneurs move here, move to the island. So you'll see some of that in, I think it was, let me just bring it up. It was in number 6 in terms of our recommendations going forward.
We have another question about the timeline for Sims seems very compressed. How do you ensure that the space is not usurped by other groups outside of the arts?
Yeah, I think that's this is a big task. I know Dan's here tonight, and this is an important task for the CRD, and then arts and culture groups to work together to come up with their. I believe it'll be an RFP process, so to come up with a proposal showing how they can work together and make the best business case, as well as community use case for Sims. And yeah, I'm not going to lie, that's definitely a challenge, but I think it's good that CRD is certainly open to hearing what arts and culture groups need, which is very promising. Well, maybe we can leave it there for now, but I invite you to look at the framework going forward. We did have a couple of edits between our versions, so I'll make sure that this version is posted to the project page, and you can take your time to go through it. And if you have questions, you can perhaps send them to Yael, and I'll take a look at them. But I think one thing that I am pleased, because we did a really stepped out process, is that when we met in September with the community, we did have the validation and the synthesis of everything that we had heard, and so that was really good to see, and we had a number of helpful actions identified. Yeah, Dan, please jump in. Thanks.
Hi, thanks, Patricia. I did just want to thank you guys for organizing this. That was a really great presentation. I did just want to remind people we are doing the open house this Friday from 10 until 1. If you are planning on attending, I would ask that you RSVP me. We do have close to 30 nonprofit groups or organizations planning on attending, so there is a lot of interest. I know some of those are just looking for, once a week meeting spaces. Some are looking for more permanent spaces, but this is an opportunity for the community to come in, explore the space, and then let us know what their needs are. So thank you.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you again for the funding to be able to carry this out. So it's not just on the CRD. I think we should also share that we really need various levels of government coming together, as well as fundraising, as well as just more community collaboration to address your facilities needs going forward. So, but I think you can get there. So, yeah, and thank you, of course, to Salt Spring Arts. So thank you, Al.
Thank you, Patricia. This has been great. I really appreciate you going through the report and taking us step by step through it. And also, I really appreciate the process that you put together with the task group for leading the community through it, opportunities to engage and give feedback. I think what we saw through this was just some really positive, hopeful conversations about working together and collaborating. And so I think that this document represents that very much.
Great.
Thank you, Patricia.
And thank you for the opportunity to hang out on Salt Spring during the summer. I'll never turn down that option. So it was great. And yeah, there was that revenge tourism thing that happened in the summer, and that's when we were doing our consultations, and the market was just crazy. So yeah, but anyhow, it was great. It was great to be there, and of course to see all the arts and culture groups and colleagues that are there. So so thank you very much. And again, if you have any other questions, you can send them to Elle, and she'll filter them to me, and we'll get back to you. So we have about a week or two that we'd be able to do that. So happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.